good evening, and a very warm welcome to Stroud Book Festival 2020, wherever you're joining us from. I'm Caroline Sanderson, and I'm Artistic Director of the festival. And as if by magic, this evening, with the US election just called, we're now going to bring you an American-themed event. We're thrilled to be bringing you, in fact, a real exclusive, and ahead of the curve chance to hear all about what will undoubtedly be one of the most talked about novels of 2021. Tall Bones, being published in April next year, is a thrilling book. Described by its publisher Doubleday as a firecracker of a literary crime novel, it's set in a remote and claustrophobic town in Colorado. What's even more exciting is that its author, 24-year-old Anna Bailey, is from right here in Gloucestershire. She joins us now to talk about her exceptional debut for the first time in conversation with Sarah Shafi. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Caroline, for that welcome. And it's such a pleasure to be here. And I have to confess, if I wasn't here, I'd be watching something like my 750th hour of CNN in a row. So it's lovely not to see you all because I can't see you all, but hello. And it's great to be talking to Anna Bailey tonight about Tall Bones. I know that many of you have had early proof copies of the novel. I can vouch for its excellent. And I hope that today's discussion will whet your appetites if you haven't read it and fuel your love for the book if you have. Please do ask questions in the comments and we'll get through as many as we possibly can. But I'll start by introducing Anna more fully. Anna was born in Bristol and spent her childhood in Gloucestershire. She studied creative writing at Bath Spa University and wanted to become a journalist, but ended up moving to Colorado and becoming a Starbucks barista instead, where no doubt she saw quite a lot of the world and quite a lot of the types of people in it. In 2018, she returned to the UK, where she enrolled in the Curtis Brown creative novel writing course and wrote her first novel, which is Tall Bones. And it was inspired by her experience of living in small town America. So welcome, Anna. It's lovely to see you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's watching instead of getting shit-faced, which is absolutely what I think we'll all be doing afterwards.
Well, I'd love to start by getting you to pitch what Tall Bones is about. And I know this is a little bit mean, but I do like to ask you to do it in 2 sentences, if possible.
Ooh, okay. Well, Tall Bones tells the story of a teenage girl who goes missing in Colorado, but it's also telling the story of her community, that the secrets that come out as a result of the investigation into her disappearance, and what it means for these people living in this very claustrophobic religious town as a result.
We'll definitely talk more about the setting and the people in the town later on. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the inspiration for the book. So obviously it is inspired by your time in America. Was it that small town setting that kind of first came to you for the novel, or was it a situation or a character that kind of was the spark for this book?
Yeah, I mean, it was, So I did live in Colorado for a while, but before that I lived in Texas for a few years, and that was really where there are 2 very different places, and that was really where I had that small town kind of life, and you could see the different ways that different people could feel trapped in a community like that was very insular, very much governed by Texas is exactly like what you think it's going to be like, and it's very, very much cowboys and big skies and Jesus, and it was that kind of place. I think was really interesting to me, the way that people can live in such a huge landscape but feel so cut off from the rest of the world. And I was really interested in the different ways that people can feel trapped by a community, whether it's by poverty or by their families or their relationships, or or by things that hold them there, like guilt or greed or something, and all of these different ideas came together to form the various characters in the novel.
So let's hear about some of those characters then. So you're going to give us a short reading, which is from very early on in the book. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So this is the end of the very first chapter. So the characters have some of the characters have been at a party in the woods, and this is the end of that. The bonfire had been tamped down, and now the blackened circle of its remains looked like somewhere a UFO might have come in to land. The tall bones are silent silhouettes against a night sky silvered with moonlight. The partygoers have scattered back down the road towards Jerry Maddox's trailer park, or crammed into their friends' cars and driven home through the woods, so there is no one around to hear the gun when it goes off. Tomorrow is Sunday, and the Blakes cannot yet imagine that they will sit in their usual lonely row of fold-up plastic chairs at church without Abigail beside them. Tomorrow is Sunday, and Emma is supposed to bleach Abigail's hair for her, because Abigail is tired of being ginger, even though she knows her parents will say she looks cheap. Tomorrow is Sunday, and Emma lies awake listening to the coyotes wail and wishes she were one of them. In the morning she will check her phone, void of any reassurance from Abigail that she made it home safely. Her eyes will return to that box of bleach sitting unopened on the dresser, and somehow she will know. By the end of the week, Abigail's face will grin emptily from 100 flyers tacked to telephone poles and church billboards flapping in the Rocky Mountain breeze. Samuel Blake will go out into the forest with the police department, crying his daughter's name into the trees. Noah will scrub the stains on his jeans until his fingers are raw, and Emma will hide the box of bleach under her bed. Dolly, sucking on her cigarettes, will knead the flaky flesh of her scalp and stare at the big cross hiding the hole in the wall, afraid that now all the wrong things will come out.
Thank you very much. So we will definitely talk about some of the people we are introduced to there, and we're introduced to quite a lot of the main players. But I wanted to talk about this, the sort of mystery element. So in that initial chapter, Tallbones is kind of set up like a mystery, possibly a murder mystery, although we don't know for sure. And while the story of what happened to Abigail is crucial and it's full of suspense and it really drives the book, what I loved was that it was less of a kind of whodunit and about why they might have done it, and whether that is Abigail kind of doing something or someone else doing it. How did you approach that kind of central mystery? And were you looking at this as a crime novel, or were you looking at it as a novel where a crime happens in order for you to explore other things?
That's a really interesting question. I think it really was more of the latter, really. What I really wanted to write about was this community and get these sort of different angles on people and how they're all how they all react to this one event. And so I actually didn't know what was going to happen until about 3/4 of the way through the novel, I think. So,
Okay.
So for me, it was much more about writing about these characters' lives and deciding, I've got this event and the disappearance of this girl, and everything else it's more of a conduit, I suppose, for me to talk about all these other things. Oh, sorry, I've lost.
Sorry, am I back now? Hello,
yeah.
Sorry. And so at the end of that scene that you read to us from the first chapter, we're kind of introduced to one of the book's other, I would say big mysteries, that of the huge hole in the wall and the cross that hides it in the house of the Blake family, which it seems like such a small detail, but it is something quite significant. And there are lots of these little things that drive toward the bigger story that you're trying to tell. And I'm intrigued as to how you plotted that, because I think there's a balance that you really successfully struck between kind of dropping hints here and there and not letting things drag on too long, which I think can sometimes sort of be to the detriment of the story. And I think you were perfect in kind of when you chose to let us in on kind of these things that you'd been hinting at or sort of describing in part. So did you have spreadsheets? Did you kind of how did you sort of plan all of this out, and what did it look like, and how did you know when was the right time to kind of make the reveal?
I did have a lot of little pieces of paper with various plot points on, and I had them all on the floor arranged in order, and I would move them around. And I think my sister, who is, I believe, watching this, probably remembers that, and our cat coming in and lying on top of them and moving everything around. So that, which, I think some of the things that my cat moved ended up being that way around in the novel. So that was nice for him. Yeah. But it was, and I do think another thing that played into that a lot was, like, as you said at the start, I studied creative writing at university, and that was very useful, I found, when it came to plotting the novel, to think about it in a practical kind of way, in terms of, this, if you think about it in a 3-act structure, and every act has to have its own climax. So what big events did I want? And it was a good way of thinking about how to space those out evenly throughout the novel.
So as you were writing, you mentioned you kind of didn't know from the very beginning what had happened to Abigail. Were there other things that you sort of inserted into the book later on, kind of after you'd done, I don't know, a first draft or a second draft? And were there things that you took out as well?
Yeah, definitely. And this novel has had a lot of drafts, and I think Abigail had various different fates in all of them. So, and it was, I mean, without giving too much away about it, I think I wanted her to have the ending that she has, and I wasn't quite sure how to get to it for a long time. So, she ended up with a lot of different things going on, but.
I'm not going to go near the ending because I don't want to accidentally spoil anything for anybody. So the family at the center of it, so we've already heard the Blake family. So that's Abigail, who's missing for the entirety of the present day of the novel, her parents Dolly and Sam, her older brother Noah, and her younger brother Jude. And they're a family that is full of secrets. But one thing that I think becomes clear to the reader very, very early on is that Sam is a controlling presence in all of their lives, and that Dolly, Noah, and Jude live in huge fear of him. Can you talk about creating that dynamic? Because at times it was difficult to read because of what is happening to these characters. Was it difficult to write as well about this kind of these painful experiences in these characters' lives?
I mean, not so much to write, but then whenever I would have to go back to it to edit it, during that process, there was, some scenes that I don't really like to reread. So, I think so. He's an interesting character for me to write. Like, so much of this book was about working through my own feelings about America and the time that I spent there, which was, a complicated time. And for me, Samuel, he represents a lot of the issues that I have with America and American culture, and particularly Trump's America, which is what I lived in. So it's a huge relief tonight that that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
But he whilst he is representative of America and a product of the culture that he lives in, I also feel that he's kind of a victim of it as well. He's a victim of the Vietnam War. He's a Vietnam War veteran, for anybody who hasn't read it, and that's not something that he, is something that he's very proud of, but it's not something that he gets any support with either. And he's also a victim of his own very religious upbringing. And so whilst you should in no way feel sorry for this character, I think that was the most interesting thing about writing that dynamic for me, was definitely his character and the different ways that he reacts with other people.
And one thing you do throughout the book is you take us back into the past, and sometimes that's the very recent past, a few months before Abigail has gone missing, and sometimes it is the distant past. So we go back into Sam's past, and you mentioned the Vietnam War. We sort of find out a bit more about Dolly, who is much, much younger than Sam, and we find out about her situation. Why did you want to do that? Why did you want to show us that back and forth and kind of what makes the characters who they are?
I think, honestly, just because it was more, to begin with, it was more interesting for me to write, to change time and to change characters and to have this sort of skipping around, so that I never got bored with anything that I was working on, because that I think that is an issue for people writing a novel. It's you have to choose something that you're going to be able to write about for 90,000 words or more, and being able to switch things up so much and to move around within the time of the novel and the characters, and to present all these different viewpoints about this community and this event kept it interesting for me. And I feel like if it's not interesting for the person writing it, then I can't expect it to be interesting for the people reading it. So I enjoyed writing it like that. I hope that other people have enjoyed reading it like that.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And so these kind of different time periods and hearing about all of the different people is kind of one thing that we learn that kind of influences who they are today. And another is, and you mentioned this at the beginning about your inspiration as well, is the way the town is. So it's a very small town called Whistling Ridge. It seems not completely isolated, but fairly kind of, it's not a minute away from kind of a big city or anything like that. And it does consider itself a pious town, a righteous town in some ways, I would say. And I'd love to hear, we also did have a question from somebody called Tessa in about this, more of kind of what you wanted to address when talking about this small community, and how much of it was directly inspired by the places that you lived in when you were in the US.
Yeah, I think it's in my head when I was writing it. The town is based a lot on a real town in Colorado called Estes Park, which does get name dropped in the novel as well as the sort of next town over from where they are. And that was a town where I was in Colorado, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place, but it is so cut off from everything else, and it's right up in the Rocky Mountains. Everything else around it is just pine trees and mountains and lakes, and it's gorgeous, but you do feel like you are very far away from the rest of the world. And I think for a lot of the people that live in the town in the book, in Whistling Ridge, that is the whole world for them. They I think Abigail talks at one point about how she hasn't actually been anywhere else. That's the only place that she's ever been, is just this town in the mountains. And for a lot of, I do remember being quite surprised when I was living in America, how many people you would meet who had, not never left their hometown, but in rural America, a lot of people who had never been outside their state, and some people who had never really been outside the county that they lived in. Like, it was people, the towns are designed to sort of keep you there, which is it's a very strange thing for me as an outsider to come in and see that. It definitely made me feel, it was very claustrophobic, made me feel very trapped there, and that was something that I really wanted to write about.
So actually you used a word I was going to use, outsider. So there are a number of outsiders in the book, including a character we haven't talked about yet called Rat, who is from Romania by kind of way of the UK. And there's also Emma, who is Abigail's best friend, who we do hear from quite a few times in the novel, who is marked as an outsider because her dad is of Mexican-American heritage. And some of the insiders as well, if I can use that word. So someone like Noah also feels like an outsider because of his identity. And although today, we've heard that Joe Biden has been elected as president, it does still seem quite a pertinent time to be discussing via fiction who does and doesn't belong in America, because I don't think these issues are kind of going to go away suddenly. Are you conscious of trying to explore kind of that bigger discussion about the country as a whole, its problems with racism and marginalized communities, or were you very much thinking of just this book, or were you aware of everything outside of the bubble of the book and how what you were writing might be a commentary on that?
I mean, yes, I was definitely aware of that. I don't feel that it was really like an intentional. I didn't sit down and think like, okay, now I want to have a character of color. I want to have a gay character. It was like, writing about modern America, it would have felt strange not to include these characters naturally, because I think that that's the people that make up America. So it would have felt very odd not to write about that. And also writing from something inspired by my own experience, there were certain aspects that I wanted to explore, the different ways that people can feel like they are an outsider in a community, as someone who was very much an outsider in America for various different reasons. It was quite cathartic for me to work through that, and that was more the angle that I started writing it from, was wanting to write about what had happened to me a little bit, but not directly, and being able to write about it through these other characters was a very cathartic experience.
It's interesting you use that word, actually, because until you said it, I'd not realised. But I think the ending of the book, or the things that happen towards the end of the book, are quite cathartic for a lot of the characters you've written about as well, in kind of dealing with what they've gone through. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was your exploration of parenthood, of motherhood and of fatherhood. So we have two mothers that we spend quite a lot of time with, Dolly, of course, and also Emma's mum, Melissa. And we see fathers too. We see Sam as kind of the most dominating father figure in the book, but also, and he was mentioned very briefly in that extract that you read, Jerry Maddox, who's quite a powerful man in this town, and whose son Hunter is part of both Abigail and Emma's lives. Can you talk a little bit about showing the complications of parenthood and writing that, and the idea about sort of not actively necessarily being a bad parent, but how a lack of action might lead you to be one?
Yeah, I mean, as Caroline stated at the beginning, in my 20s, so I'm not anybody's parent. And so this, I had a lot of fun writing that, actually, and I think perhaps because I didn't need to be too introspective about it, I guess, because I wasn't worrying about my own role as a parent. But I think I do think that one of the biggest things that you learn growing up is that your parents are just regular people, that they are just like you. They are just as embarrassed about things, and they have just as many secrets and just as many flaws as a normal person. And I think that was sort of the way that I wanted to portray it in the book. And the younger characters, I think, don't necessarily appreciate that. But Dolly is certainly a character who has as much agency as her children, and they don't see that about her. They're all the main characters in their own lives, but she has her past with her dreams that she had to give up on, and her desires to get away from here, and her desires for her children, and plans that are separate from all of that, and so to I guess I wanted to approach all of them as their own characters first before I approached them as parental characters.
I love that idea of being the main characters in their own lives. And actually, we've had a question in from Claire, which I think links in quite nicely, who says, are there any characters that you want to write more about from this book?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know, to be honest. I think I like where I leave a lot of them. I think I would worry that I would ruin it too much if I tried to.
I could say something, but I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But
I think there's a couple of characters I think I would want to write more about them, just so that I could really ensure that they get the happy ending they deserve, which they do. But
I feel like you're talking about who I want you to talk about, but we can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah.
There's so many layers, and the book is so rich, and I really feel it's one of those novels that every time you read it, you could sort of find a new detail or learn something new or notice something new. We had a great question in from Dakota Edwards, who's actually in Delaware. Is she a friend of yours? And she wanted to know what the most inconsequential thing, i.e. like the weather during a certain part of the book or a random quote, was that influenced Tallbones in quite a significant way.
Oh, that's a really good question. I do think certainly, something like the weather, definitely, that in that part of the country, that does play a lot of plays a role in the lives of everybody, and everything is very much determined by the seasons and everything, which I think again does play into that. That I keep going back to it, but that idea of being trapped somewhere. Like, I spent a winter not a whole winter, but I spent part of a winter up in the Rockies in New Mexico, and the snow that comes in there is insane, and that's definitely somewhere where you will end up being trapped if you get stuck there. And I think that it's all sort of, it's a very everything kind of comes together, I think, to make this a place that it's difficult to get away from. And for a lot of the characters, spending time there, for me, in that part of the world, and then coming to write this book, I wanted it to seem like somewhere that people don't leave, because it is so difficult in real life to get away from places like this.
I mean, I definitely agree with you on that idea of the weather. I think it's really interesting about the story kind of being set pretty much largely in sort of autumn, winter, when the weather is getting colder and the days are getting darker. We're getting quite a few questions in from people watching, so I'm going to go straight to those. So Tilly wants to know, and presumably this is, post-pandemic, she'd love to know if you plan to travel more, perhaps for inspiration for your next story.
Oh, I had so many travel plans for this year. Oh, yeah, I was gonna go to Svalbard
Okay.
Up north, which obviously I did not do, and I'm not going to. But yeah, I have the next book is something that involves travel, so it's a real shame that I've not been able to do a bit more of that. And I would like to go back to Colorado at some point, actually. And maybe now, the political situation being what it is, maybe now would be, post-pandemic would be a safer time to go. So
definitely. Well, hopefully we'll all be able to travel a bit more within the next year. I think that's being not too
maybe this time next year.
Laura asks, what comes first for you, the plot or the characters, and why?
Oh, I think I'm definitely a character-driven writer. I think that if I can't feel their characters first, then everything that happens just sort of feels like very wooden actors putting on a very boring play. If I'm writing about it, like I have to really care about the characters that I've written before I really get into the meat of the story.
Another character question. Cindy wants to know, you created these characters, but do you blame any of them for the things they do in the novel? And it sounds like Cindy has read the book, but we'll have to answer it so that we're conscious of people who haven't read the book. But yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question. Yes, I think so. I think it's that kind of cliche about your characters that kind of take on a life of their own. But I think you've managed to hopefully write a decent character if you're writing and you get to a point where you think, oh, actually they really wouldn't do that, and I can tell they don't want to do that, and they're going to do something else. And I certainly did have plenty of those moments and moments where it was like, oh, are they really going to do this now? Are they? And then they totally want to, so you have to let them. But I do. There's certainly a moment. It's difficult to say without giving anything away, but it's one of the big climactic moments that involves the whole town. Was definitely something I think those characters worked up to on their own. I didn't see that coming for a lot of the novel. So
I know what you're talking about. I also think it's interesting how you explore kind of the next stage of that, characters that do or don't take responsibility for things that might happen in the novel. I realise we haven't spoken about this actually, and it is strange because it's the title of the book. But can you talk a little bit about the tall bones of the novel, and are they a real place or based on something real that you saw in America?
So the tall bones, if you're watching this then you haven't read the book, are a big stone circle in the middle of the woods. And I have not traveled everywhere in America, so I can't say for sure, but I don't think stone circles are really a thing on that side of the Atlantic. So this was more something from my own life in the UK, where I've visited a lot of stone circles and spent a lot of time, a lot of my life in Cornwall, where there are a surplus of stone circles everywhere. So it's a thing that I really love and a thing that I find really interesting because we know so little about them and their purpose, and they themselves have so much mystery to them that I wanted to include one in the story. So I'm sorry to anybody who's disappointed that there aren't any in the States, but
I wasn't sure if it was something you'd sort of seen in the woods, but they do add a kind of an air of mystery and drama to the novel as well. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, so apologies if I'm not. Avi wants to know what inspired you to kind of write something that was partly crime fiction as opposed to sort of something else, something perhaps that explored this without that sort of crime element.
Oh yeah, I just really love crime fiction, and I love crime TV. I mean, that's something that I'm just fascinated by the way that these stories, I think they're a great structure for a story, because you already know what the end is, essentially, that you are going to have an answer to your question. And I like that you then have to try and sort of fit a question around that. And but yeah, I've grown up on Agatha Christie and all of that, and I love to read crime. I love to watch crime. So it was, I think, no question for me what sort of story I was going to write.
Lisa wants to know who the most supportive person in your life is when it comes to your writing.
Oh, it's absolutely my mum, for sure.
Shout out to your mum.
No, it really is.
Who is also a writer as well, right?
She is, Jane Bailey. Yeah, she's always supported that I wanted to write, and encouraged me to study it and to really take it seriously as a career, which is a huge thing, I think, especially the way things are at the moment, where the government is not massively supportive of artistic careers. And it really means a lot to me to have been able to have that support behind me.
Are you a writer who sort of shares bits of your writing as you're going along, or are you kind of someone who is very selective about who sees your writing and when they see your writing?
Yes, definitely the latter, I think. Yeah, I think well, my mum did have to very kindly read several hundred variations of different chapters of this book when I was first writing it. But I think as it started to take shape and became something that I was taking a little bit more seriously, I was less inclined to let anybody look at it until I'd finished it. And certainly with the one I'm writing at the moment, I'm very keen to keep that under wraps until I feel a bit more confident about it.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So Jane asks, were there scenes that you ended up cutting that you wish you could have kept? And if there were, are you able to tell us what those scenes might have been about?
Oh, that's a good question. There definitely were a lot of scenes that got cut. I don't know if there's anything. I love cutting stuff, and so I love chopping things out, and so I am always pretty happy to be able to get rid of something, actually. So I don't think there's anything that I particularly wish I could have kept. There was a sort of a storyline in a much earlier draft of the novel where some of the characters thought that Abigail had been abducted by UFO, and they had a sort of slightly X-Filesy kind of subplot to it where they were trying to investigate that. But that was a very, very early draft of the novel, and I'm very glad it didn't end up in this. But that was fun to write, for sure.
I love that, though. It would have been a very different book, I think, but an equally interesting one. I'm intrigued, were there any, because there are a lot of characters, and I think you fleshed them out quite well. Are there any characters that have kind of been left on the cutting room floor?
I don't think anybody got cut out particularly, although some characters have changed a lot, like Hunter, who we mentioned earlier. He was originally a lot more of an antagonist to begin with. And because he is that sort of, he's a very all-American boy who plays sports, and his dad is, in charge of the town, and he's wealthy and he's white, and he's he's got that kind of privilege behind him. So he kind of started out as more of an antagonist, but actually as the story went on, it was more interesting to sort of subvert him and make him kind of more of an ally to some of the other characters, because I suppose it's not what you expect from somebody like that within the bounds of this story.
Definitely. So I think this will have to be our last question, I'm afraid. But Jane, a different Jane to the last one, asks, who are your biggest writing influences? I mean, you mentioned Agatha Christie earlier as a crime writer that you love, but there are people whose work you turn to again and again for inspiration.
Yeah, well, I don't. They're not crime writers, but I certainly, in terms of their writing, I could read Alice Munro or Elizabeth Stroud for the rest of my life, and I do frequently reread their writing. And the way they talk about, particularly the way they write about women, I really love that as a reader and as a writer. It's always something that I find inspiring, the way that they talk. And a big influence before I started writing this book. I absolutely loved Celeste Ng's Everything I Never Told You. That was a huge. I really love the way that she was able to combine a mystery, a crime, but with a family drama, and that was what I really wanted to do with this book.
Not only have you written a fantastic book, but you also have exquisite taste in writing. I am afraid that's all that we do have time for. So Tall Bones is out in April next year, and I have no doubt, Anna, that it's going to be a huge success. Thank you for your time today on behalf of everyone watching, and for writing such a wonderful novel. And thank you to everybody who did watch, and for all your absolutely amazing questions. Goodbye from us.
Oh, that was such a fascinating event. And can I say just how wonderfully appropriate as well? How did we manage that? That was just brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you so much, Anna. All of us at Stroud Book Festival send you huge congratulations on your brilliant debut novel. Very tantalisingly, you can't actually buy Tall Bones until next April, but at least you can say that you heard about it here at Stroud Book Festival first, and you can rush to your local independent bookseller in April and buy it. If you've enjoyed this event and you'd like to support us here at Stroud Book Festival, perhaps by donating what you might have paid for a ticket tonight, details of how to do this are on our website, stroudbookfestival.org.uk. Coming up very soon at 8:30, I'll be in conversation with the marvellous Michael Cashman, actor, activist, politician, and now member of the House of Lords. Do join us then.